Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Spirit, the stimulating program initiative for retirees that inspires thought. I'm Judy Steinig, Director of Community Programs for the Orthodox Union, and it's my honor to coordinate and host this program. Spirit was started several years ago as an on-site program, and now we're happy to present it as an online program for empty nesters, baby boomers, retirees, not yet retirees, sandwich generation parents, and seniors, everybody who's looking for educational, intellectual, and spiritual growth. Now that we are all still settling in from the pandemic, Spirit has become the perfect way for each one of us to engage in a virtual setting. Today is the first session of a two-part program commemorating Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, which took place 82 years ago this week. This was the beginning of a horrific time in our history of the Shoah, the Holocaust. There are very few viewers of our Spirit program who do not have some kind of a personal connection to the Shoah, either as children of survivors, as a survivor, with relatives, neighbors, and friends who suffered unspeakable nightmares. We know that we will never forget. We either grew up in the midst of the Shoah or in the shadows just a few years later. But what of the next generations? Our responsibility and obligations are to make sure that our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, that they know and they understand what took place. Even our neighbors, those non-Jewish people that we might work with or associate with, do they really know what happened? As we all know, there are just too many people in the world that would like to deny the entire period of time. In our program today and on Thursday, we will be hearing from those who are in a place to teach us lessons that we can share with our families. Our presenters today are Eva Moremi and Deborah Leonard. Eva grew up in Czechoslovakia as an only child to two Holocaust survivor parents. She is the author of Hidden Recipes, a Holocaust memoir, which tells the story of her family's will and determination and their struggles to survive. Deborah Leonard was born in a displaced persons camp in Germany in the aftermath of World War II. She came to the US as a young child in October 1951 and grew up on the north side of Chicago. Their complete bios are in the emails that you have received, and I don't want to spend precious time discussing it because they will certainly tell you themselves. It is my honor and privilege to turn the program over to Eva Moremi this time.
Thank you, Judy. Good morning, everybody. It is such a privilege to be here this morning with you. Thank you, Rebecca and Judy Steinig, for inviting me to speak. I am honored to be here with all of you and share with you the story of my parents. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint, so give me a second. Today, there is a shocking rise in hate and anti-Semitism. Holocaust denial and distortion of history are frequent occurrences. As a second generation of Holocaust survivors, I feel that it is my responsibility to go public with the story of my parents in hope of educating the younger generation who knows so little about the Holocaust. Also, to share the story in hope of a kinder and more compassionate world. The Holocaust started because of hatred, and we have the power to make better choices, and we must strive to make the world a better place for everyone. The horrors of the Shoah must never be forgotten and must never happen again. Hidden Recipes is the story of my parents, Elena and Ernest. In the book, I refer to them as Itza and Ernő, as this is how they were called by family and friends. Hidden Recipes is a story of endurance, will to survive, courage, faith, and finding joy and happiness again. And these are my parents on their honeymoon, and then later in 1996. My parents did not know each other before the war. My father was married to his first wife, and they had a daughter, Marika. Both my parents were born in Austro-Hungary, but the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed end of World War I, and the first Czechoslovak Republic was founded in 1918. Czechoslovakia was very good for everyone, and Itza had a happy childhood. My family, Itza's father, my Kellner grandfather, owned a textile business, and they had a comfortable life. Her parents hired a German governess because they wanted her to learn German, as they spoke German and Hungarian and later Czechoslovak. She was an only child until age 15, when her sister, Vera, was born. They called her Bobby. Family and friends called her Bobby. Itza's parents sent Itza to a prestigious German school in Brno. And when she completed the school, she returned home and became a kindergarten teacher. Unfortunately, the peaceful and prosperous life in Czechoslovakia did not last long. Hitler targeted Czechoslovakia for annexations. So this map will show you that how Czechoslovakia was broken up. The blue color, the northern, western, and southern Czechoslovakia, which was the Sudetenland, the Bohemian German population, was ceded to Germany, and that was end of September 1938. This is the Sudetenland. 1 month later, approximately, which was November 2nd, 1938, the southern part, the green region, south of Czechoslovakia, which is today Slovakia, Germany forced this region to cede to Hungary. And this is where both sides of my family lived. So suddenly, my family was no longer Czechoslovak. They became Hungarian. Just 1 week later, when this region on the south of Czechoslovakia ceded to Hungary and my family became Hungarian, Kristallnacht broke out. And that was right before midnight, November 9, November 10, as Judy mentioned. It broke out in Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland that I pointed out earlier. Now that my family was Hungarian, my father, Ernő, was required to go to the mandatory Hungarian forced labor service, munkaszolgálat in Hungarian, where all the Jewish men served unarmed. According to the Hungarians, the Jews were unreliable to carry arms. They were required to do strenuous labor under very harsh conditions, very brutal conditions, and they were guarded by anti-Semitic fascist Arrow Cross troops, Nyilas. And my father, he survived because he escaped. He had the courage to escape, and because of the help of the righteous Gentiles. During World War II, Hungary was allied with Germany, and the Axis powers invaded Soviet Union. That was middle of 1941, and So they invaded Soviet Union, and the battles near Stalingrad was so, they were one of the biggest battles. And the German army was defeated. The Hungarians' losses were substantial, and Hungary tried to get out of the alliance with Germany in secret, but Hitler found out, and this was not acceptable to Hitler. And the German troops invaded Hungary, March 19, 1944. Very soon after, Adolf Eichmann arrived to Budapest, because Eichmann was in charge of deporting the Jews. And he was in charge of deporting the Hungarian Jews, which were the largest remaining Jewish population in Central Europe. This is 1944. Already many other Jews, many other countries were deported. Even Eichmann was surprised to see how enthusiastically the Hungarians collaborated with him. My mother, her young sister, who was only 16 years old, and their parents were immediately forced to leave their home and go to the ghetto in the town where they lived, with the help of collaborators who were their neighbors, who lived in the same town. So my family was arrested in May 1944, and Jewish people from the nearby region were also gathered and brought to the same ghetto, among them Ernő's wife, daughter, his parents, and other family members. As I mentioned, Ernő, my father, was married before the war, and this was their daughter, Marika. Here, this is a baby on this picture, but by the time she was deported, she was 3 years old. My mother, who was a kindergarten teacher and loved children, noticed a beautiful little girl, curly, long, blonde hair with blue eyes. And she was in the courtyard of the ghetto reciting poems and singing songs. And my mother approached the little girl and her mother, and a friendship developed in the ghetto. This was my father's first wife and daughter. But at that time, no one could have even imagined that after the war, Itza will meet Ernő and she would become his second wife. After 5 weeks in the ghetto was liquidated. Everybody was put on cattle trains, and my mother, Itza, never saw my father's wife, Irenke, and Marika again. The cattle trains were very crowded. The journey took 3 or 4 days. The conditions were terrible. They could not sit, they could not move, they didn't get food or water. The air was stuffy, they could hardly breathe, there were no windows. And by the time they arrived to their destination, there were many dead among them. But finally the train came to a stop, the doors opened, and Itza never forgot her first impression when she stepped off the train. It was an eerie feeling, seeing a vast area, no grass, no trees in the near vicinity, heavy smoke coming out of the chimneys, and a terrible stench in the air. They arrived to Auschwitz Birkenau, the largest of the Nazi concentration and death camps in Poland. It was middle of June 1944. Immediately the men were separated from the women, and my grandfather, my Kellner grandfather, couldn't even say goodbye to his family. He was rushed away. The women, as soon as they moved up in front of Mengele, my grandmother was sent to the left, Itza and Babi, my mother and my aunt, to the right. Itza never saw her parents again. The mass deportation of nearly 400,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz took place between May 15, 1944 and July 9, 1944, just a period of 7 weeks. And in these 7 weeks, 90% of the Hungarian Jews were exterminated. Among them, my 4 grandparents, my father's wife, his 3-year-old daughter Marika, and other family members. So on the very left, there is a photo of my Kellner grandparents, my mother's parents. In the middle, on the top, my Kaufmann grandparents, my father's parents. Marika is on the bottom to the right, where she was older, not yet 3 years old, but these are the only photos that we have. On the top right, my father's brother who lost his wife, my aunt Elsa, and the 2 children. And on the bottom, my 2 cousins who also perished. My mother and her sister were spared, at least temporarily. And they were no longer registered in Auschwitz because the registration system collapsed with the arrival of the Hungarian Jews. So they spent all this with Cellappel, and I am not going to describe the conditions in Auschwitz because I'm sure many of you know the brutal conditions, the starvation, the diseases, the brutality, the death among them. And while they stood at Cellappel daily for hours and hours, which was also a form of punishment, selections were going on. Excuse me. Selections were going on constantly, daily. And one day it was Itza and Babi who were selected to go to the gas chambers. They stood there all day and all night. And that day, the Nazis ran out of Zyklon B, the gas, Zyklon B. In the morning, an order was received from Germany requesting Jewish slave laborers. 1,000 Hungarian women were put on trains and transported to Germany, to an underground munition factory, subcamp of Buchenwald. The munition factory is called Hessisch-Lichtenau, but it was a subcamp of Buchenwald. When these emaciated women arrived, the commandant turned to the SS guards and said, "I ask for workers. You sent me skeletons." The women were registered, and this is the first time my mother and these Hungarian women were registered in the Buchenwald subcamp. My mother became prisoner number 20409 and Babi 20407. On the left side, you see a circular identification pin, which I will tell you about it later. This was a pin that my mother got from the Nazis. On the right is just a little tie that was given to my mother. And it was on her wooden clocks. I'm going to stop sharing for a few minutes and just talk to you a little bit, and then we'll come back again. So just 1 second, I'm going to, okay. So they arrived to Hesse-Lichtenau munition factory, where work was physically demanding for these malnourished women. They were filling grenades, mines, bombs with toxic materials. Many of them, their skin turned yellow because they got liver poisoning from this toxic the filling of these toxic materials. And many of them died from poisoning. Itza, because she was fluent in German and she spoke with a Hochdeutsch, high German dialect, she was selected by the Nazis to be a translator and a messenger. And she was told that if you don't have any translating to do or messages to take, we want you to clean the premises of the factory. Now, in Hesse-Lichtenau munition camp, they continued to be starving. Food was minimal. And after the long shift, when they got back to the barracks, they would huddle together, talk about food. The memory of pre-war life was a powerful tool, and talking about food was essential because it gave them hope. And this Hungarian woman remembered the meals that they used to eat with their families during the Shabbat, the holidays, and shared recipes among each other. The cleaning duties that Itza had in the factory proved to be advantageous to her. One day as she was cleaning, she found a stack of paper in the wastebasket. When no one saw it, she pilfered the paper and tore the bottom of her, she wore this one piece of clothes. Now in Auschwitz, they shaved their hats and they took off all their clothes. So she had this one piece of, she called this a summer coat, but it was a very thin fabric that was very long on her. She tore the bottom of the fabric, made a fabric pouch, and hid the stack of papers inside her summer coat. And every night when they huddled together in the barracks, she began to write the recipes with a little tiny pencil that she found in a factory. The recipes were written on a piece of papers that on one side had the information about the ammunition that was manufactured in Hesse-Lichtenau. The other side was blank and suitable for writing. My mother wrote in Hungarian and often put the names of the people that she got the recipe from. And now I'm going to go back to share with you a few of these recipes. Writing these recipes was an indirect resistance on my mother's part. This was her way of defying the Nazis. So here she wrote a recipe for an almond pudding given to her by Pani. Pani, unfortunately, was sent back to Auschwitz she was among the 206 women who were sent back because they couldn't keep up with the strenuous work. And she was murdered in Auschwitz. The other side is 33 pieces of a German 5-centimeter light mortar. The next one is vanilla cream for Napoleon, given by Mrs. Gersh. This was written on a Regal Mine 43, which was a German steel-cased anti-tank bar mine. The next one is darashfések, recipe given by Piri. Piri survived both Auschwitz and survived the munition factory in Hessisch-Lichtenau. Sadly, Piri was shot during the death march. This is on the SD-50. It is a thick-walled explosive bomb, was a fragmentation bomb, which was used by Luftwaffe during World War II. Chestnut Roulade by Irene is written on the Hessisch-Lichtenau entry ticket or an admission ticket. Fig and Nut Slices by Mariška. It was given by Mariška, the recipe, and written on the other side of the SC-250, which was an air-dropped general-purpose high-explosive bomb and used by Luftwaffe during World War II. It weighed 250 kilograms or 550 pounds. Magdolna is also, it's a general-purpose bomb. Magdolna cookies were given by Ethel Jambor from Zala Egerszeg. Túros gombóc and dumplings with sweet farmer's cheese by Mariška was written on a delivery or entrance ticket. In the book,
sorry, Eva, excuse me, I'm so sorry. We're kind of running out of time. Deborah's been, we need to give her time, but we will, if you can hang around, we can share this after Deborah's presentation. I'm sure there'll be questions and whatever you want to share with us to give out later with our recording.
Okay, may I can I have 1 minute just to end?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So the recipes were saved with my mother. They stayed with her all the time, and they returned with her to Czechoslovakia. Some of the women who shared their beloved recipes with my mother did not survive, but those who did survive, most of them are no longer alive, but the recipes and the stories will live on for many generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. For everybody listening, I will be sending out the link that you can order the book that Ava wrote for Hidden Recipes. That will be coming later with your with the recording that you'll see later on today. It is my honor now to call upon Deborah Leonard, who will give us a presentation about her family's experiences. Thank you so much, Ava.
Thank you.
Deborah, you have to unmute. No, you're not unmuted.
Okay, I also need the full screen since I'm not screen sharing. Is that possible?
You are we see you. We see you in the
okay. Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so I want to thank Robertson Judy, the Spirit and OU for the privilege of being able to speak about this extremely important topic on the 82nd anniversary of Kristallnacht. I love Elie Wiesel's quote that many people use: to hear a witness is to become a witness. I don't ever remember not being a witness because I was a child of survivors. I have been a witness all of my life. This picture next to me is a picture of my beautiful mother and my father once they got to the US after a long, tedious journey from their towns in Poland, which I'm privileged to be able to tell you about. I consider it actually a sacred obligation based on the dwindling population of survivors themselves. And as I've become older and a grandmother, this topic has become in the last decade more and more important to me. The importance and the legacy and the need to, as Robertson Judy said, to pass this down to our children and grandchildren and their children and grandchildren and the community at large is one of our most important obligations. Anyone who has been to a lecture, read a book, or seen a movie about the Holocaust knows 6 million innocent people were killed. Although now, with the rising anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, even that's become an issue. But even for those that believe that 6 million were killed, hearing that number, which is unfathomable, over and over and over again, can create a numbness to its reality. But the number becomes more real when it's about one family, like Eva's or mine. My parents both miraculously survived the Shoah, and when I tell their stories, I am sure you will agree that it is a miracle that they lived and that I am here to tell their story. My father survived the Shoah, and as most people that did survive, because of critical decisions when a fork in the road happened. And his fork happened in September of 1939. My father's family came from a small shtetl in Poland called Tyszewicz, which was near Lublin. The population, 3,800 of Tyszewicz, was all Jews. In September of 1939, when Germany broke its pact with the Soviet Union, the Russian army had been in Tyszewicz, starting to do what the Soviets did in that year. At the point of the break of the pact with Germany, the Soviet army left Tyszewicz. 900 of the 3,800 people in my dad's shtetl made a snap decision. And again, we have to put ourselves in these people's shoes. My dad's family was business people. They had a large home. They were very observant Jews. My dad went to Cheder. All of these people lived normal lives like we do. So to make a snap decision, which they did, to cross the border from Poland into the Soviet Union with the retreating Russian army is in the end what saved their lives. His family spent the duration of the war in hard labor camps in Siberia and Uzbekistan, which I could go into a lot of details on because I've done a lot of research with Yad Vashem and all the websites, but I don't think that that's really the key to why I want to talk to you, because it's the survival piece and the lessons that we need to share with our children and grandchildren as well. But the miracle is, because they made that critical decision, they did survive the war. The majority of Tyszewicz Jews, 3,800 to start out with the 900 that left with the Soviets, were then shot in mass graves, and only 32 people survived after World War II of the 3,800 that lived in Tyszewicz. So certainly the decision that his family made and the fact that they lived was a miracle. My mother was only 11 years old when the war broke out. And her story also, I'm sure you will agree, as is true of all the survivors, is based on quick decisions I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, we think we're making important decisions in our daily lives, and they are important, but these were life and death decisions that our surviving parents were making. She was 11 years old, like I said, the oldest daughter. Her father was conscripted into the army, and then she, her mother, and 2 siblings were left to fend on their own. Thanks to some righteous Gentiles in the community, she was on her own, mostly a hidden child, spending most of the war in barns, haystacks, surviving on breadcrumbs and potato peels, and only having minimal contact with her mother and the other 2 siblings because it became too difficult for the righteous Gentiles to hide several people. So since she was the oldest daughter, she was on her own. Her hometown, Hirbeshov, was not a shtetl. It was a real city with a population of 18,000, of which 11,750 were Jews before the war. So a very sizable Jewish population. After the war, only 176 Jews remained of the 11,750. Like was the case in Tishevitz, Hirbeshov is very close to, just miles, 5 miles from the Ukrainian border. And as was true in a lot of the Eastern European countries that the Germans took over, the native population also helped, and did so in this case, with killing the Jews. And the thousands of Jews were killed at the end of the war. Out of the 11,750 that inhabited Hirbeshov, there were only 132 left. Another important point, Jewish history, and I'll go back to that hopefully if I have time when I talk about the trip I took to Poland, my first trip in 2019. The history of Jews in Hirbeshov went back to the 1440s. If you look at Jewish history in all of these countries, it's magnificent, the learning, the culture, the history, the music. And again, just like these stories of survival and quick decisions that save lives, one of the things that's really important, I think a lot of times, just like the numbness of the 6 million, the only image we have is the history of the war and the concentration camps, when in fact, there was a rich, beautiful history of Jews who lived in all these countries and not only had normal lives, but very elegant, beautiful lives. Most historians agree that 90% of Poland's, since both of my parents were from Poland, 3.3 million Jews were murdered in the Shoah. My parents lived miraculously, as I've told you, and were introduced by friends after the war. They married in the summer of 1946 in a transient town, Waldenburg, on the Polish-German border, with the intent to travel to a DP camp in Germany, Landsberg, and then hoping to come to the US in a very short period of time. I actually, and I hate to take it out or I would have showed it to you, I have my mother's ketubah that she managed to carry through all of these countries and all of these experiences. And Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik is our family rabbi. And when I showed him the ketubah at one point, because there was a question about my grandfather's name when he passed away, I had said, it's got to be unusual. How did my mother manage to keep this ketubah based on where they were and what they were going through. And his answer has always stayed with me, because his answer, I hope I'm quoting directly and correctly, for the women of that generation, these ketubahs were really important. So he actually was not surprised. Unfortunately, when they got to the DP camp, the Landsberg, the sponsor, a cousin that they had in Philadelphia, died. The husband did not feel that he wanted to take on the responsibility of my parents' family. And because they didn't have a sponsor, another really important detail that's left out of a lot of the history, the immigration laws were such that people just could not enter, Jews could not enter the United States after the war. A number of these DP camps had been concentration camps. So here you have people that already survived the Shoah, and now they're in these displaced persons camps, some of which had been concentration camps, and they can't get out because of various and sundry immigration laws. So because of the cousin dying and not having a sponsor, my parents were actually in these DP camps for 4 years and never got to the United States till October of 1951. I actually would have been born in the United States and not in the German DP camp, which I remember absolutely nothing of because I was a baby. But yeah, they were in those DP camps for 4 years. And then I want to take a second to talk a bit about the DP camps. The survivors, even though they were stuck, many, like my parents, you hear the story over and over again. The reality is the minute they got to the DP camps, whatever condition they were in and whatever condition the camps were in, they hit the ground running. They married, they had kids. By the way, the children in the DP camps were called Mashiach's children because based on what they went through, it was a miracle. They celebrated holidays, they set up schools, Yiddish newspapers, theaters. So the spirit, even though, like Eva had said, the Nazis called her mother a skeleton when she went to the factory, with everything that they went through, they got to these DP camps, they were stuck there, they couldn't get to where they were going, and yet they hit the ground running to start new families over and do Shabbos and all of the holidays, which I think is again, for me, a very important part of the message that we want to communicate about our ancestors, those that survived, the survivors. Once my parents finally got out in October of 1951, like I said, they also, it's the same spirit. Nothing, I mean, this is how they survived, the people that did. Nothing could dent that spirit. And it's something that I think about myself many times, especially this year when we have our own challenges with the pandemic. And I find the comparisons very, but anytime in my life, whether it's the pandemic or whenever I've had a challenge, I search deep in my soul and find that spirit that my parents had that got them through the Holocaust, the DP camps, and then finally to the US. So when they got to the US, of course, they hit the ground running just like they did in the DP camps. And so they immediately got my dad, his first job, even though his family had been big business owners, was in a factory making shadow boxes. But because of his roots and where he came from, he worked extremely hard and a lot of overtime and a second job. and shortly had saved up enough money to open up a business. They all went to school at night to learn how to speak English better and to become American citizens. They all immediately got involved in their communities and shoals and became important members of those as well. My mom, until the kids got to be older, high school age, helped my dad in the business. But when the kids were older, she developed her own career. She went to work for Sher Brothers, which is a major microphone manufacturing company in Evanston. I hope I've given you a small piece of why I feel so fortunate to have been raised by parents that went through the horror of the Shoah and yet instilled in me and modeled such important positive behavior that I could base my life on. My father told us daily, and if I could give you a virtual tour of my house, I have signs about being happy all over my house because my father, based on what he went through, and yet he modeled daily, be happy, be happy. And again, I try to model that behavior, pass it on to my grandchildren, because having the faith he had and this core philosophy of being happy helped him to get through the Shoah. And it becomes so important for us, just like the important culture that existed in Poland before the war, to remember all of these beautiful, positive things that are part of our legacy and our history. Part of my dad's being happy once he got to America was that he had the freedom to make daily decisions in his life that we take for granted and add up to the life we create for ourselves. All of this was taken away, of course, from all of the 6 million and of those that survived. There's a really important book, which I'm just going to give you the author because it's short on the time, by a survivor herself that was a student of Viktor Frankl, Eva Eger. Her book is called The Choice, Embrace the Impossible. And what she's actually gone on, and she's my real role model because she has gone on, even though being a survivor and going through all of this, helping other people who suffered trauma, including military servicemen. I really recommend the book. My mother had her own mantras too. She used to say, and it sounds better in Yiddish, that a person could do more damage to himself than an entire platoon of soldiers. I run into a challenge, all I do is think of my mother with her cute and sarcastic sense of humor. I don't want to be that person that's doing more damage to myself than a whole platoon of soldiers. So I think very carefully about my decisions, how I'm living my life, and now, of course, share that with my grandchildren. I always think of my parents and how they miraculously survived to build a family so that I could be here to continue their legacy with the family I built and to tell you their story. This past summer, I'm going to have to do it really briefly. I had the good fortune to go on my first trip to Poland with Or Torah, Rabbi Engel, a very good shul in Skokie. Although I always knew I was a child of survivors and thought I had a real understanding, until I actually walked in Auschwitz, until I saw the Arbeit macht frei sign, until it's just not the same. Seeing it in the movies and on a book, when you walk around in Auschwitz, it's hard to believe. When you look at the ovens and the smokestacks and look at communities all around the concentration camps, and they're still there. When you look at the personal items, that's Again, because I'm all about, that's what makes it real, the personal items, children's shoes, women's pots, men's talits, eyeglasses, protheses, all of these personal items belong to a real human being who had an ordinary life before he was sent on a cattle car to Auschwitz. In Block 27, which Yad Vashem has turned into a memorial to the 1.5 million children, I saw children's drawings that could have been drawn by our children, my children or grandchildren, and yours. There was a picture of a little boy that looked just like one of my grandsons, my son when he was young. Yad Vashem had those tall pages of names like they have at the museum. There were probably at least 1,000 on these pages, floor to ceilings, of Borgs. Borg is my maiden name. How many of these, just like the little boy in the picture, who definitely looked like my family, how many of these were family members who perished? People often feel people feel you have to walk in the shoes of another person to understand it. For me, this trip to Poland brought it home. Of course, the experience was not theirs, but it gave me the even more drive to have to tell their story once I got a real taste of their story. One other experience that I have to at least touch on, we walked in the Warsaw Ghetto. And again, this relates to what's going on in the United States right now with the divisiveness and hate and growing anti-Semitism. They had the Warsaw Ghetto totally marked off. So we actually walked all through it. There's absolutely no way that everybody in Warsaw didn't know what was going on. 500, I mean, based on where these lines were, it would be like putting a ghetto by Millennium Park in Chicago or somewhere in Maintown, Manhattan. Everybody knew what was going on. It was smack. I mean, to hear about the Warsaw Ghetto, but to actually walk physically in this space and see people all around, everybody knew what was going on. Our goal, besides sharing the legacy with our own children and grandchildren, and this is really important to me, and Judy knows because I speak, she heard me originally at Oakton Junior College, where the population, they have a Department of Jewish Studies, it's mostly non-Jewish people. We need to speak to non-Jewish communities to get our message out. Never again is now. Anti-Semitism is rising. We need to come up with ways that we can help the communities around us, even non-Jewish communities, understand that the Jew is like the canary in the gold mine. If it happens to the Jew, it's gonna happen to other people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. You gave us not only your family's history, but some very, very important lessons. I just wanted to ask if anybody has any questions for our presenters, you can put it in the chat. We'll wait a minute or two. But while that's happening, let me know if there are any questions that go to the host, okay? I just want to tell you that the program will be continuing on Thursday with Bina Kuzach and Rabbi Shaliach Tzibor Sam Josephson. He will be giving, Bina will be giving us the story of her family, and Rabbi Josephson will also be giving us his family situation, but he'll also, as a Shaliach Tzibor, as a chazan, he'll be giving us some musical presentations of the Holocaust as well. So if you haven't registered, that of course needs a separate registration. Each program, as do all of our programs, are sent to everybody who registers following the program, probably later on this evening, with any materials that our presenters want to share. Okay, we have, oh, actually I have the same question. Eva, okay, the question is, how were you able to attain the photographs from your family? How were they able to get that out? Okay.
I'm sorry, the photographs of my family.
Yes, it's like, it's amazing that you're able to have them now. How were your parents able to get them at it, which is probably similar to Deborah's ksuba. But
So,
Eva, can you share that with us?
Yes, so my parents were robbed of everything. They returned to their home. They had the house, but they had nothing. No bed, no nothing, no picture, nothing. There were family members that were hiding, couple family members that were hiding with the partisans or some other ways. And that's how my parents obtained a handful of photos. And what I showed you, that's probably all that we have in our possession. And the recipes survived Auschwitz, I mean, not Auschwitz, but the Buchenwald concentration camp after Auschwitz, and the death march. And at one point in Leipzig, the building where the Nazis put these women was bombed. There was fire. My mother ran into a burning building because she forgot the recipes inside. The recipes came back to Czechoslovakia, emigrated to United States, and today they are in the Holocaust Museum, Washington, D.C.
Unbelievable. Oh, Deborah, there's been a request for you to repeat the name and the author of the book you mentioned. So I'm going to ask you to repeat it, but also send it to me, and then we'll put that in the email along with Eva's book. So you want to just tell everybody what the name of the book is now?
Edith Eva Eger, E-G-E-R, The Choice, Embrace the Possibility.
Okay, so if you'll send that to me and we will include that. Oh, there was a question about signing up for Thursday's talk. Okay, so anybody who attends any registers for any Spirit program, you will receive later on, hopefully later on today from me, look from my email, Steinig J, you will get today's recording, and below the recording, we always give you the registration and the materials for the upcoming program. So just look for that. Plus, of course, the Spirit Archives. This program will get into the Spirit Archives hopefully in about a week or so. The archives are up to date as of, I think, last week. Programs from 2 weeks ago, don't use any of the links that I've sent you. All of those are now in the archives. As I mentioned once before, our account has changed. So the link I'm giving you today will work. The link from last week will work, but previous ones, just go to right to the archives and you will see all of the programs. And this program will get into the archives probably another week or so. I think that was it for the questions. I want to thank Eva and Deborah so much for sharing. It must not be easy to share all this information because we realize it's very emotional, but so meaningful to all of us. And I'm sure that everybody is going to want to share all that what you've learned today with your families. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for our presenters, and we look forward to our presenters on Thursday. And everybody should have a good day, a good week. Be healthy and safe. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.